So once again, this is Danielle at the Weather Service. We'll get started with today's severe weather briefing. So just taking a look at the situation overview, looking at a cold front will bring showers and storms to the area tomorrow afternoon into tomorrow evening. And with that, there will be a marginal to slight risk of severe weather, mainly from the early afternoon through the early evening hours. Main threat will be damaging wind gusts from any storms that do become severe, although we can't rule out an isolated tornado or some large hail and locally heavy rainfall in one or two places. I do want to also mention that gusty winds are expected even outside of the thunderstorms, and that could lead to some nuisance impacts Thursday. Right now, the forecast is just below wind advisory criteria, but a wind advisory may be needed, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And then also want to mention that some minor coastal flooding could also lead to nuisance impacts tonight. So taking a look at the severe weather threat levels, again, damaging wind gusts would be the highest threat, although we can't rule out one or two tornadoes and some hail. We are confident that those showers and storms are going to occur along and ahead of that cold front, but we do only have low to moderate confidence in the occurrence of any severe weather occurring across the area. So again, this is not a high confidence severe weather event for our forecast area. The greatest threat of severe weather will be north of the local area, more up towards the Jackson area. But there is at least some threat that extends south, just south of the I-10 corridor. So you can see that this is the latest severe weather outlook. And so we do have that slight risk across southwest Mississippi and the adjacent portions of southeast Louisiana, with that marginal risk extending south just south of the New Orleans metro area. So again, I just want to reiterate that this is not a high confidence severe weather event, and the confidence actually drops off the farther east you get into the forecast area. As the line continues to move eastward later in the day, it really loses some of its oomph and some of its forcing. And so, the farther east it is, the less confidence we have in any kind of severe weather occurring. So taking a look at timing, we've tried to break it down into 4 different areas. And so you can see the farther west you are, kind of starting around midday through the early afternoon, and then progressing eastward throughout the early afternoon and into the early evening. So as far as looking at afternoon buses, really the only areas that could really kind of be an issue are those groupings from number 1 and number 2. So kind of from the I-55 corridor and westward, looking at those areas. But again, the farther east you get, the less confident we are that any severe weather would even occur. Taking a look at the rainfall forecast, we're really not expecting a whole lot of rain. Most places forecast to receive less than an inch, although as usual, locally higher amounts are going to be possible and could lead to some nuisance type ponding and street flooding. That's going to especially be true with some of what we call our precipitable water. It's basically just a measure of how much water is in the atmosphere. And we are going to be pretty high on that, around the 90th percentile for this time of year. So 1 or 2 of these storms could be efficient rainmakers. And so we can't rule out that street flooding or nuisance type ponding in some areas that do receive heavier rainfall. Outside of that severe weather threat, we are expecting moderate to strong winds tomorrow during daylight hours. So what you're looking at now is the peak wind gust forecast between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. tomorrow, and you can see that the vast majority of the area is forecast to see wind gusts in excess of 30 miles per hour, with a pretty big chunk of it in the 35 to 40 mile per hour range. This is currently just below our wind advisory criteria, which is sustained winds of 25 miles per hour or gusts of 40 miles per hour. So right now, we do not have a wind advisory out. However, if these forecast gusts do increase, we may need to issue one overnight for the daytime tomorrow. So we'll be taking a closer look at that overnight tonight. But currently, there is no wind advisory in effect. Those strong southeast winds are also going to cause tides to come up a little bit more than they already are. So taking a look at the tide forecast, you're looking at Waveland and Shell Beach. In that area, in both of those plots, I've got the high tide for tonight circled in red, and the top kind of curve line with the gray shading. So that's the forecast with the forecast uncertainty. And you can see in both instances, it rises to just above 1 foot MHHW. And this is also just slightly higher than the highest astronomical tide of the year. So typically that's when we start to see some nuisance type impacts, maybe some water starting to encroach on some of the lowest roads that are right along the coast. So we may end up issuing a coastal flood advisory just for tonight. And again, the greatest impacts are southeast facing shores due to the southeast winds and mainly east of the Mississippi River. So keep an eye out for that. If we do issue that coastal flood advisory, I'll send an updated email out for those areas. Otherwise, that's pretty much what we've got. So severe weather threat is greatest from early afternoon through the early evening, and mainly across the more northern areas and more northwestern areas. If any severe thunderstorms do develop, the greatest threat will be damaging wind gusts. And then outside of those thunderstorms, we are still expecting gusty winds that could lead to some nuisance impacts and maybe some nuisance coastal flooding impacts.